Hello. In honor of Martin Luther King Jr. Day, I'm going to read to you a story taken from Great Stories Remembered, Volume 2, compiled and edited by Joe Wheeler. The story today is entitled My Life as a Black Man. Jesse Owens with Paul G. Neimark. As a black man in 1930s America, Jesse Owens faced many obstacles, but none more formidable than the one he faced at the 1936 Olympics. No one called me nigger until I was 7. That was because in Oakville, Alabama, in the World War I years, a sharecropper's child like me, a great grandson of slaves, almost never saw the white man who, in effect, owned his every breath. In our case, it was John Cannon, who lived in a big house on top of the hill and had 8 Negro families sharecropping 250 acres of cotton for him. My father, Henry Owens, had the largest spread, 50 acres, because he had 4 sons to work it. But I couldn't help because I was so sickly that every winter I came down with pneumonia. A couple of those winters, when my father couldn't find enough wood to keep the fireplace going in our little cardboard house, I came close to never seeing spring. Yet somehow my mother always managed to pull me through. When I was well again, she'd take my father aside and plead with him to go north. "Little JC's gonna die unless we do something, Henry." My father resisted the idea. He felt too old to change, and his fear of the unknown was greater than the fear of poverty. But I got sick again. This time, blood came up every time I coughed. Finally, one night in February 1921, I was 8. John Cannon sent for father. We'd had a particularly good cotton crop that year and had got out of debt at Cannon's store. That threatened Cannon's hold on us, I guess. So he sent for my father to come up to the big house on the hill, and there his assistant proposed that the 50-50 deal be revised to 60-40, Cannon's favor, retroactive. For Henry Owens, 42 years of silent resentment finally became words. "That ain't fair," he said. "Fair?" the assistant replied. "What does fair have to do with you?" Those words stuck in my father's craw, and the next Sunday after church he told us we were leaving Oakville for Cleveland. He couldn't find steady work in Cleveland, but my 3 brothers got jobs in the steel mills, and we managed not to starve. My health improved, and soon even I held jobs, though sometimes for pennies, while going to grade school. There still wouldn't have been a Jesse Owens story, however, without Charles Riley, the physical education teacher and the first white man I really knew. When he asked me to go out for the track team in the 5th grade, it wasn't because he saw any potential track champion in me, but a potential corpse. My legs and the rest of me were so thin that I looked like a malnutrition case. "I can't," I told him. "I work after school." "Well, Jesse," my real name was James Cleveland, but people changed JC to Jesse. "How about before school, then?" So, every morning, 45 minutes before the opening bell rang, this shy, bespectacled little teacher would meet me out on the sidewalk by the school and work with me. He was like a father to me. Charles Riley put me on the first step not only to athletic fame, but to escaping the sickness of black-think, the hatred that black militants today make a profession of. He showed me beyond all doubt that understanding and love can exist between races. We never talked about white and colored. There was no reason to. He taught that by example. And his example taught me a lesson I'll never forget, even if the black thinkers line up from here to China shouting that it isn't so. The black think, pro-Negro, anti-white bigotry of some extremists today is not so much different from John Cannon's white think. After several months, My legs still looked like pieces of straw. I wanted to quit. "I'll never make the team this year, Mr. Riley," I said dejectedly. "Who says we're trying to make it this year?" Riley answered me. "You're training for 4 years from Friday, Jesse." Without the pressure of having to change overnight, I learned to enjoy running. I was relaxed out there. By the time I reached high school, I was running close to the national high school record in the 100-yard dash. Then one day in 1933, I tied the world's record, running the distance in 9.4 seconds. Suddenly, the whole world was at my door. Reporters wanted interviews. Colleges started writing, sending people, making offers. Free tuition, a new car, a 6-room apartment. I hated to say no, but I turned the offers down. I wanted to believe in the American dream, but the scene was tearing me apart. I was scared of moving into a world where I would live like a millionaire while my father nearly starved. He had just been laid off a job loading 100-pound crates that paid him $12 for a 60-hour week. I began to go to pieces inside. Finally, I protested in the only way I could. I quit the track team. One day at school, Riley took me aside. "Jesse, I respect you for what you're doing, but if I could get your father a permanent job, would you go to college on your terms?" "There are no permanent jobs for Negroes, Mr. Riley," I answered. "But if there were?" That weekend, Charles Riley drove to Ohio State University and talked with Larry Snyder, the best track coach in the country. On Sunday night, Riley was back with 2 letters. One was from the dean's office. They wanted me to attend college there, and they offered me 3 jobs: waiting tables, working in the library, and running an elevator to pay my tuition and modestly support my family. At 17, I had married my childhood sweetheart. The other letter offered my father a permanent job with the state of Ohio. I was 5 inches taller than Charles Riley, but I threw my arms around him and kissed him. It wasn't easy at the university. The experience left plenty of scars. The other Negro athletes and I had to take our meals in the one ramshackle house where all the Negroes lived. En route to track meets, our white teammates always went into restaurants first to see if the rest of us could come in. If the answer was no, they brought food out to us. Once, when a diner owner saw what was happening, he ran out and jerked the plates of food away from us, yelling, "I don't want money to feed no niggers." After soul-shattering hurts like that, I would run my head off in the next track meet, trying to run out all the frustration and anger and fear that was inside of me, fighting back, fighting to prove something. In the summer of 1936, when I boarded a ship for Germany and the Olympic Games, that same agonizing fear reflex cramped my soul. Negroes had gone to the Olympics before and won before, but so much more was expected of me. Adolf Hitler, arming his country against the entire world, had perverted the games into a test between dictatorship and freedom. In a way, I was competing against Hitler himself and his myth of Aryan supremacy. I was entered in 4 events, and Hitler had been grooming his best athlete, Lutz Long, to beat me in one of them. Long, a tall, sandy-haired, perfectly built fellow, the ideal specimen of Hitler's Aryan supremacy idea, had been known to jump over 26 feet in preparing for the games. No one knew for sure what he could really do because Hitler kept him under wraps. But stories had filtered out that he had gone as far as I had, further than anyone else in the world. I was used to hearing rumors like that and tried not to think too much about it. Yet the first time I laid eyes on Long, I sensed that the stories had not been exaggerated. August in Berlin was muggier than May in Ann Arbor or Columbus. Yet the air was cool, and it was hard getting warmed up. The ground on the runway to the broad jump pit wasn't the same consistency as that at home. Lang was used to it. I wasn't. His first jump broke the Olympic record in the trials. Did it worry me a little? More than a little. He was on his home ground and didn't seem susceptible to the pressure. In fact, he'd already done one thing I had always tried to do in every jumping event and race I ran: discourage the competition by getting off to a better start. Well, there was only one way to get back to the psychological advantage. Right off the bat, I'd have to make a better jump than he did. I didn't want to do it that way. It wasn't wise to use up your energy in preliminaries. Long could afford to showboat in the trials. This was his only event, the one he'd been groomed for under Hitler for years. I had to run 3 races besides, more than any other athlete on either team. But I felt I had to make a showing right then. I measured off my steps from the takeoff board and got ready. Suddenly, an American newspaper man came up to me. "Is it true, Jesse?" he asked. "Is what true?" I answered. "That Hitler walked out on you? He wouldn't watch you jump?" I looked over at where the German ruler had been sitting. No one was in his box. A minute ago, he had been there. I could add 2 and 2. Besides, he'd already snubbed me once by refusing the Olympic Committee's request to have me sit in that box. This was too much. I was mad, hate mad, and it made me feel wild. I was going to show him. He'd hear about this jump, even if he wouldn't see it. I felt the energy surging into my legs and tingling in the muscles of my stomach as it never had before. I began my run, first almost in slow motion, then picking up speed, and finally faster and faster until I was moving almost as fast as I did during the 100-yard dash. Suddenly, the takeoff board was in front of me. I hit it, went up, up high, so high I knew I was outdoing Long and every man who ever jumped. But they didn't measure it. I heard the referee shout, "Foul!" in my ears before I even came down. I had run too fast, been concentrating too much on a record and not enough on form. I'd gone half a foot over the takeoff board. All the newspaper stories and books I'd ever seen about that Olympic broad jump had me fouling on the next of my 3 tries, because the writers felt that made the story more dramatic. The truth is, I didn't foul at all on my second jump. I played it safe, too safe. I was making absolutely sure I didn't foul. All right, I said to myself, Long has won his point, but who will remember the preliminaries tomorrow? It is the finals that count. I just had to make sure I got into those finals. I wasn't going to let him psych me out of it. I wasn't going to let Hitler anger me into throwing away what I'd worked 10 years for. So I ran slower, didn't try to get up as high during my jump. Surely, I said to myself, if I can do 26 feet trying my best, I certainly ought to be able to do a foot less without much effort. That would be enough to qualify for the finals, and there I'd have 3 fresh jumps again. That's where I'd take apart Lutz Long. It's funny how sometimes you can forget the most important things. I forgot I wasn't the kind of guy who could ever go halfway at anything. More than that, no sprinter or jumper can really take just a little bit off the top. It's like taking a little bit off when you're working a mathematical equation or flying an airplane through a storm. You need the total concentration and total effort from beginning to end. One mistake and you're dead. More than that, my whole style was geared to giving everything I had, to using all my speed and energy every second of what I was doing. Once or twice, I'd tried a distance race just for kicks. I was miserable at it. If I couldn't go out all the time, I was no good. So, my second jump was no good. I didn't foul, but I didn't go far enough to qualify either. It wasn't just Long and Owens in the event anymore. There were dozens of other participants from other countries, and a bunch of them, too many, were now ahead of me. I had one jump left. It wasn't enough. I looked around nervously, panic creeping into every cell of my body. On my right was Hitler's box, empty. His way of saying I was a member of an inferior race who would give an inferior performance. In back of that box was a stadium containing more than 100,000 people, almost all Germans, all wanting to see me fail. On my right was the broad jump official. Was he fair? Yeah, but a Nazi. If it came to a close call, a hairline win or lose decision, deep down, didn't he, too, want to see me lose? Worst of all, a few feet away was Lutz Long, laughing with a German friend of his, unconcerned, confident, Aryan. They were against me, every one of them. I was back in Oakville again. I was a nigger. Did I find some hidden resource deep within me, rise to the occasion and qualify for the finals, as every account of those Olympics say? No, I did not. I found a hidden resource, but it wasn't inside of me. It was in the most unlikely and revealing place possible. Time was growing short. One by one, the other jumpers had been called and taken their turns. What must have been 20 minutes or half an hour seemed only like seconds. I was going to be called next. I wasn't ready. I wanted to shout it. I wasn't ready. Then the panic was total. I had to walk in a little circle to keep my legs from shaking, hold my jaw closed tight to stop my teeth from chattering. I didn't know what to do. I was lost. If I gave it everything I had, I'd foul again. If I played it safe, I wouldn't go far enough to qualify. And this is what it all comes down to, I thought to myself. 10 years and 4,500 miles to make a nigger of myself and not even reach the finals. And then I couldn't even think anymore. I started to feel faint, began to gasp for breath. Instinctively, I turned away from everyone so they couldn't see me. I couldn't help but hear them. The thousands of different noises of the stadium congealed into one droning hum. Ch, 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 louder and louder in my ears. It was as though they were all chanting, choke, 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 hatefully, gleefully. Ch, 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 ch. Suddenly, I felt a firm hand on my arm. I turned and looked into the sky blue eyes of my worst enemy. Hello, Jesse Owens, he said. I am Lutz Long. I nodded. I couldn't speak. Look, he said, there's no time to waste with manners. What has taken your goat? I had to smile a little in spite of myself, hearing his mixed-up American idiom. Ah, nothing, I said. You know how it is. He was silent for a few seconds. Yes, he said finally, I know how it is. But I also know you are a better jumper than this. Now, what has taken your goat? I laughed out loud this time, but I couldn't tell him above all. I glanced over at the broad jump pit. I was about to be called. Lutz didn't waste words, even if he wasn't sure which ones of them to use. Is it what Reichensteller Hitler did? He asked. I was thunderstruck that he'd say it. I started to answer, but I didn't know what to say. I see, he said. Look, we talk about that later. Now you must jump, and you must qualify. But how? I shot back. I have thought, he said. You are like I am. You must do it 100%, correct? I nodded. Yet you must be sure not to foul. I nodded again, this time in frustration. And as I did, I heard the loudspeaker call my name. Lutz talked quickly. Then you do both things, Jesse. You remeasure your steps. You take off 6 inches behind the foul board. You jump as hard as you can, but you need not fear to foul. All at once, the panic emptied out of me like a cloudburst. Of course! I jogged over to the runway. I remeasured my steps again. Then I put a towel parallel to the place half a foot before the takeoff board from where I wanted to jump. I walked back to the starting spot. I began my run, hit the place beside the towel, shot up into the air like a bird, and qualified by more than a foot. The next day, I went into the finals of the broad jump and waged the most intense competition of my life with Lutz Long. He broke his own personal record, and the Olympic record too. Then I, thanks to him, literally flew to top that. Hours before, I had won the 100 meters in 10.3, and then afterwards the 200 meters in 20.7, and helped our team to another gold medal and record in the relay. During the evenings that framed those days, I would sit with Lutz in his space or mine in the Olympic Village, and we formed an even more intense friendship. We were sometimes as different inside as we looked on the outside, but the things that were the same were much more important to us. Lutz had a wife and a young child, too. His was a son. We talked about everything from athletics to art, but mostly we talked about the future. He didn't say it in so many words, but he seemed to know that war was coming and he would have to be in it. I didn't know then whether the United States would be involved, but I did realize that this earth was getting to be a precarious place for a young man trying to make his way. And, like me, even if war didn't come, Lutz wasn't quite sure how he would make the transformation from athletics to life once the Olympics were over. We talked, of course, about Hitler and what he was doing. Lutz was torn between two feelings. He didn't believe in Aryan supremacy any more than he believed the moon was made of German cheese, and he was disturbed at the direction in which Hitler was going. Yet he loved his country and felt a loyalty to fight for it if it came to that, if only for the sake of his wife and son. I couldn't understand how he could go along with Hitler under any circumstances, though, and I told him so. He wasn't angry when I said it. He just held out his hands and nodded. He didn't explain because he didn't understand completely himself, just as I couldn't explain to him how the United States tolerated the race situation. So we sat talking about these things, some nights later than two Olympic performers should have. We didn't come up with any final answers then, only with a unique friendship. For we were simply two uncertain young men in an uncertain world. One day we would learn the truth, but in the meantime, we would make mistakes. Lutz's mistake would cost him too much. Yet we didn't make the mistake of not seeing past each other's skin color to what was within. If we couldn't apply that principle to things on a world scale, we still could live it fully in our own way in the few days we had together, the only days together we would ever have. We made them count. We crammed as much understanding and fun as we could into every hour. We didn't even stop when we got out on the track. Lutz was at my side, cheering me on for every event, except the broad jump, of course. There he tried to beat me for all he was worth, but nature had put just a little more spring into my body, and I went a handful of inches further. After he failed in his last attempt to beat me, he leaped out of the pit and raced to my side to congratulate me. Then he walked toward the stands, pulling me with him while Hitler was glaring, held up my hand and shouted to the gigantic crowd, "Jesse Owens! Jesse Owens!" The stadium picked it up. "Jesse Owens," they responded, though it sounded more like Jazzy Owens. Each time I went for a gold medal and record in the next 3 days, the crowd would greet me with, "Jazzy Owens! Jazzy Owens!" I'd had people cheering me before, but never like this. Many of those men would end up killing my countrymen, and mine theirs, but the truth was that they didn't want to, and would only do it because they had to. Thanks to Lutz, I learned that the false leaders and sick movements of this earth must be stopped in the beginning, for they turn humanity against itself. Lutz and I vowed to write each other after the games, and we did. For 3 years we corresponded regularly, though the letters weren't always as happy as our talks at the Olympics had been. Times were hard for me, and harder for Lutz. He had had to go into the German army, away from his wife and son. His letters began to bear strange postmarks. Each letter expressed more and more doubt about what he was doing. But he felt he had no other choice. He was afraid for his family if he left the army, and how could they leave Germany? It was Lutz's world, just as the South had been the only world for so many Negroes. The last letter I got from him was in 1939. Things become more difficult, he said, and I'm afraid, Jessie. Not just the thought of dying. It is that I may die for the wrong thing. But whatever might become of me, I hope only that my wife and son will stay alive. I am asking you, who are my only friend outside of Germany, to someday visit them if you are able, to tell them about why I had to do this, and how the good times between us were. Lutz. I answered right away, but my letter came back. So did the next, and the one after. I inquired about Lutz through a dozen channels. Nothing. A war was on. Finally, when it was over, I was able to get in touch with Lutz's wife and find out what had happened to him. He was buried somewhere in the African desert. Lutz Long had been my competition in the Olympics. He was a white man, a Nazi white man who fought to destroy my country. I loved Lutz Long as much as my own brothers. I still love Lutz Long. I went back to Berlin a few years ago and met his son, another fine young man, and I told Karl about his father. I told him that, though fate may have thrown us against one another, Lutz rose above it, rose so high that I was left with not only 4 gold medals I never would have had, but with the priceless knowledge that the only bond worth anything between human beings is their humanness. As I look back over my 57 years, I must admit that at times I have come close to violence, to crossing over into the camp of the black thinkers, the militants. I came closest on the day that Martin Luther King Jr. was shot. I had known and loved Martin long before he came to national prominence. As I sat grieving, the long buried smell of the Oakville cotton fields rose to stifle my senses. We'd spent centuries slaving in manure to grow one man like that, and he'd been snuffed out as if he were a dime store candle. I wanted to hate. At the same time, seeing what it was inside me made me hold back. For what I saw there was the same thing that drives every militant black thinker today, a desire for revenge. American Negroes have made tremendous progress away from that Oakville we've all lived in. Today, we're making it. Believe it or not, most black men today start just about equal with the white. We may not begin with as well off a set of parents. We may have to fight harder to make that equality work, but we can make it work. I know what is usually said, the black men and women don't have a chance. It's a lie. If the Negro doesn't succeed in today's America, it is because he has chosen to fail. Yes, there are exceptions, but there are exceptions for whites too. That black militants of today, often talking from integrated high-rises, restaurants, and universities, don't know what it is to be really shut out, as we were in our Oakville. The soapboxing black thinkers, the angry extremists, the nationalists, represent a very small minority of today's Negroes. The violence, hate, and self-pity they preach are the easy way out. What we need is self-control, true assertiveness, and long-range planning. We can't expect to undo hundreds of years in a month or so. Not every man can have a Charles Riley or a Lutz Long, but every Negro has a Martin Luther King. If the black man is owed a debt from the past, he owes a debt too. He owes the men who have come before him, the ones who helped him personally, the many more who helped him by standing up when it counted and not copping out. He owes it to them not to give in to violence and anger. Owes it to a lot of men as yet unborn. He owes it to himself to be a man, a human being, first and last, if not always. You see, black isn't beautiful. White isn't beautiful. Skin deep is never beautiful. You see, I believe in a loving creator God who designed each of us uniquely and individually. That unique creator God loves us each individually, just as he created us. When we keep that as the foundation and priority of our thinking and keep these principles that Jesse Owens shared with us at our forefront, we can succeed. The Bible tells us our world will not recover. The Bible tells us the future. And if we choose to follow that loving creator designer, we can once again be able to be together in harmony no matter our color, no matter what the outside looks like, the inside will all be in humble accordance and praise to that designer. Thank you.